A new report out today highlights the top political risks worldwide. The Eurasia Group's annual list explores global threats in 2019. Here are the top 5. The U.S. at home comes in 5th, looking at the escalating investigations into President Trump and a possible constitutional crisis. Number 4 is European populism, which takes a closer look at Brexit and nationalism across the continent. Number 3, cyber gloves off, focuses on cyber attack threats. Number 2 looks at rising tensions between the U.S. and China. And at the top of the list, bad seeds. Eurasia Group president and CBSN contributor Ian Bremmer co-wrote the report and joins us now. Ian, bad seeds sounds so foreboding, but this is sort of a title for a category of issues.
Yeah, call it geopolitical climate change, right? And none of it's urgent. When you look at the nationalism and populism that's growing inside democracies around the world, when you look at the worsening alliances and general relationships between big countries that matter, U.S. Russia, U.S. China, transatlantic, within the Middle East, all of those things are trending in a negative direction. Yet none of them are urgent. None of them are going to cause a crisis tomorrow. It's rather the response to the next crisis that we have, whatever it is, whether it's terrorism or cyber or the next economic downturn. These bad seeds mean that we won't have the resilience. It's not going to be like after 9/11 when the country came together, the world came together, or like after the 2008 financial crisis when the country came together and the world came together. It's going to be very, very different. And that's why it's, you know, it's not like the U.S.-China relationship is a problem, but it's not like we're going to have a trade war this year.
Right.
There's going to be a lot of foreboding, a lot of headlines, but it's really the longer term. Yeah. And we're not dealing with it.
Like a slow motion train crash.
You can see it coming.
Okay, so one of the things that you talk about when you talk about bad seeds, and you just mentioned it, the system of global alliances.
Yeah.
And, you know, we just saw how the president tweeted out that within 30 days, you know, troops were going to be pulled out of Syria. Now that seems to be modified a little bit after John Bolton spoke over the weekend. But that, you know, really was a concern to one of our allies in the area, the Kurds. They are wondering what's next for them. So can we talk a little bit more about the president's America First strategy and the impact beyond domestic?
The America First strategy is one that certainly plays very well to Trump's Republican base. It also helped get him elected. So it's popular. And you can see it playing out in the election of other people around the world, too, in their own countries, in Brazil, in Italy. The weakness of Emmanuel Macron in France right now is because of that. So Trump has certainly latched on to something that matters.
Right.
But other countries around the world that count on the United States look at the Trump administration and look at the way America's been heading for some time now, and they say, can we really count on these guys?
Right.
And if you're the Japanese or the South Koreans, how much do you put stake on America's security umbrella? If you're the Europeans, how much do you put stake on the trade relationship you have with the United States? If you're the Kurds, how much do you put stake on 2,000 special forces that are on the ground in Syria, in part trying to ensure that you're protected? I mean, John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, said those people matter, but let's face it, that's certainly not the message that's been coming from the president, and it's not the message that the average American wants to hear.
Well, you know, I considered that the fact that sometimes, you know, the president issues a message that doesn't always translate into action immediately. And this thing with John Bolton is a perfect example where the president said, we've defeated ISIS, and now we have, you know, his senior sort of national security advisor saying, actually, we haven't quite defeated ISIS yet, but when we do, that's when we'll pull out. So sometimes what the president says isn't exactly what he does. And is that something that allies and former allies are weighing?
The first thing the president did, or excuse me, the first thing the president said when he became president was Muslim ban, right? Yeah. And then the court system said, not going to happen, right? On the other hand, Trump said, I'm pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He did it. He says, I'm pulling out of Syria within 30 days. He's not going to do that. He said he was going to pull out of the Iran deal and the Paris Climate Accord. He did that. So number one,
here, though,
he says a lot of things that make allies concerned, and also his bark and his tweet is bigger than his bite. I think it's fair to say both of those things.
Right. Yeah. I like that, the bark and the tweet. Okay, let's talk about your red herrings that you list off. You talk about a return to dictatorship in Brazil, possibly. Saudi Arabia, Iran, the Russia-China relations, all things that you call red herrings. Can we talk a little bit about Saudi Arabia? Because we've been talking, Saudi Arabia's in the headlines right now today. You call that a red herring?
Yeah, in other words, these are all things you don't have to worry about. Iran's not blowing up this year. Brazil's not becoming a dictatorship. dictatorship. Russia, China are not developing a global alliance to undermine the United States, and Saudi Arabia is not going anywhere. Mohammed bin Salman certainly has had his wings clipped through the Khashoggi murder, right? But he is very much still the crown prince. The recent cabinet reshuffle has brought more loyalists around him. He has had to respond to international pressure. And so in part, that means that you now have a ceasefire in the port of Hodeidah in Yemen. He got that done, and he probably wouldn't have if we hadn't found out about what happened in that Saudi consulate in Turkey. He is likely to back away from the blockade against Qatar, which is an ally of the United States. The U.S. is pressuring the Saudis on that front as well.
That's good news.
That's good news. Domestically, a lot of the major reforms that the Mohammed bin Salman has been pursuing have not been so popular with the conservatives that matter, and he's probably not going to be able to be as assertive in trying to push those forward. So it's a little good, a little bad.
I would argue that some of those major reforms are actually not that major.
Some of them are, and some of them aren't. It's the same thing with Trump, right? So he says he's going to build this incredible new city called Neom, and it's going to be $500 billion investment.
Right.
Virtually nothing's happened. That's no. But he also said the religious police are going to get off the streets and stop harassing young men and women for their behavior. You know what? That's happened. And I saw last week, for the first time ever in the Saudi kingdom, there was a concert where young men and young women were actually dancing together in the same space, which doesn't sound like a big deal here, but actually in Saudi Arabia is kind of historic.
Yes.
And we should want that to happen. So let's be clear that when you have someone who's that young, that full of himself, and he makes all these pronouncements, some of them are complete BS, but some of them are MBS, and they're really happening, right?
I saw that coming.
I
saw that coming, but it was so good.
Yeah.
Iran.
Yeah.
Okay, so the U.S. pulls out of this nuclear agreement, but everyone else stays in. Is that why you're calling Iran a red herring, that basically not much is going to change?
Yeah, that the Iranian deal is staying intact despite the U.S. pulling out. And Secretary of State Pompeo will privately say that unless Trump gets a second term, nothing's happening on Iran. That a Democratic president will come back, they'll put the deal back in place from the Americans. We'll be exactly back where we were under Obama. So 2019, actually, not much to see in Iran.
Can we talk about the Trump of the tropics, I think they called him, Bolsonaro from Brazil?
Sure.
You know, very, very conservative, said some wild things on the campaign trail, but still managed to get elected. Should we be concerned about him?
Less, you know, and he's going to get a lot of media in the same way that Trump gets a lot of media in the United States. But Brazilian institutions are really strong. They have a strong independent judiciary, just like we do in the United States. That's why you have former President Lula in jail right now. And you know what? The Supreme Court justice that put Lula in jail is now the Minister of Justice under Bolsonaro. Definitely we will see and hear things under this president that we don't like in terms of, you know, progressive social issues, for example, treatment of gays, comments he makes about women. But if you ask, is that going to suddenly break Brazilian democracy? The answer is absolutely not. Too much is being made of that.
Checks and balances. Ian, thank you so much.